Thank you for coming, and thank you for the studio. It's a wonderful idea to do these tasters. And I am mostly going to talk about poetry and performance. I believe it was advertised originally I would also do blogging. So perhaps at the end of this, if we still have a few minutes in the question time and you want to hear that part, I will do a little on that. I have some things to say. So as you know, I'm a performance poet, and I will start with a few performances to give you an idea of what that's like. And the first one is called Girl Walking Across Europe. And I should say about this one that I'm collaborating right now with local poets, Manjit Sahota and Martin Gray, and we're trying to do a Poets for Refugees video that was sparked by this and by the Walk with Amal, which is a huge puppet that people are walking from the border with Syria and Turkey up through Europe and ending in England and in Manchester, and to highlight the plight of refugee children and refugees. So that, because I had written this poem and started performing it, when I heard about that, I was really excited about that and wanted to try to do something. And I have lovely poets we're working with, including Annie, who is present here. Thank you, Annie. And it's really, these people are just incredible how they have joined in. So this is called Girl Walking Across Europe. Let's watch a girl walk across Europe. Walk across Europe with a backpack and a cat named Hermione Wob. And as she walks, people join her, not to tell her to go home, not to warn her off the borders, but to give her flowers and biscotti and an embroidered cloak, and to walk beside her across the boot of Italy, where the sea captain did not get arrested for saving her from the sinking boat, but was lauded and crowned with roses, where the embroidered girl walked on with Hermione Wob to arrive at the Austrian border, where she was not sent to a refugee camp, but where the Chancellor greeted and gifted her with a handsome horse-drawn carriage, where she rides and parades with a brass band through a Vienna that throws her kisses, where at the city's edge, she gets out and asks to walk on, calling Hermione Wob to her side, walking along the Danube with blue in her hair and honey on her lips, where she waltzes on, copper skin shining, singing an ancient chant. Thank you. The next piece is called Solar Grandmother. And this in Spanish is called Abuela Solar. It is set in Mexico, where grandmothers are being taught to install solar power in remote villages, and where the Spanish are the major investors. Tres Marias waits for me. I come with these hands that light the night, in a canoe through the sweating jungle, on horseback, through the weary hills, on foot, on the sly, steep trail, up the mountain, to bring my magic de la luz. Me, Norma Guerra Sanchez, born on the coast of Oaxaca, who once knew only of salt water and fish. And yes, I can count as many fish as los abuelos y abuelas can catch. I have counted tens, hundreds, thousands in my life. Each day brings a fish, we say. I am 52, have seen many days, and never thought I'd be chosen to learn. They came to our village and picked me. Why? Was it the curve of my face or the length of my hand? I went to the Barefoot University with many others to learn the secrets, the parts of the pieces that will connect us to the sun itself. Then I took the parts and the secrets home, and without hurry and with persistence, I built the things that capture the sun in their wings and hold it in their bodies and shiver and hum. And yes, help us call the doctor when we are ill. Help us plug in a phone to charge it to call the doctor. Help the children study at night to learn to be the doctor. If they don't want to learn to count fish, to count the days, as I did. But I wonder, my grandchildren now say, "Turn on the light, abuela, tengo miedo de la oscuridad." But I know they were not afraid before. Will we soon be frightened of our own shadows? Have we lost the wisdom to bailar a la luz de la luna? Now I am here, stepping on the stony path into the village. Buenos dias, Tres Marias, Paso del Tigre. It is I, bringer of nightlight, that will change the Tigre completely. And I tell you, be careful. The Spanish are coming again. They want your land this time, so they can steal the light of your sun and turn it into gold. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, it's hard. I'm not yet completely adjusted to performing on Zoom, and it is something. I don't know if anyone is yet completely adjusted to performing on Zoom. It's difficult. But anyway, so that gives you a little idea. I know you couldn't see all of me because I kind of move with my body, but I tried to show you my hands some. And now I will talk some more about spoken word, how I got into it to start with. And of course, the answer is by accident. I started in the 1990s, and the first piece I had written was about tomatoes, believe it or not. I I started to perform part of it to this friend, like, about the tomatoes going like this. And she said, "You have to do that in front of people." And I said, "Oh, no, 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 I'm 32. I'm too old to become an actor." And she said, "No, you have to do that. You have to." So having a lot of artist friends at the time, and now again, fortunately, they hooked me up with someone named Fausto Fernos. And Fausto was a Texan Puerto Rican, or a Puerto Rican Texan, who spoke Spanglish, is what he said. Fausto is absolutely hysterical and wonderful. Anyway, but he got me into his group called Peach for short, and I think he liked the Peach part. It stood for Performance Art Church, and it was a very wild and woolly group of people, including his mother. And we did all sorts of things, even at an old circus zoo in Houston, which the dust quotient there almost killed me because I'm an asthmatic. So anyway, from there, I went on to do some short plays in the city's Fringe Festival. When I moved abroad later, because I did have a stint in the country, and if you read my blogs, you'll read some about that. I've done very different things, I guess you could say. In Europe, I performed some in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland at events that I planned, except for one time when I was invited by cousins to read at a big party for their 40th birthday party. So they sort of commissioned me for that. But anyway, I mostly performed when I could find enough people to understand my English, enough English words. And if it was in a German-speaking place, I put more German words in, and that sort of thing. So then I'm going to go ahead and, I'll say in Nottingham, because this will link me to you all. I had joined the Nottingham Writers Studio fairly early. I can't remember, 2012 or 13. And I did mostly fiction, which I had taken to doing because I like to write short stories and fiction, and because you can do that alone at home without needing anyone to understand the words you're speaking. So then I went to a poetry festival 2018, and Panya the poet, wonderful Panya, was there with Abby, and they were doing an event, and I had brought this lyrical piece. And they said, as soon as we came in, which was a very good habit of theirs, not everyone does this at every event, they said, "Would you like to read? We'll put you on the list." And I thought, oh. And I had this piece that was very short, and I said, well, I could read this. Okay, good, let's put your name here. So it's their fault. Anyway, no, I'm very happy that they did that. And I've just, been bowled over by the Nottingham Writers Studio and the poets and everybody. Very, very lovely community, and have helped me feel, part of, settle in and feel part of something in this country. So why do I think this work is important? Well, there's several things, and I did a little research too. And one thing I thought was interesting: poetry predates the written word as entertainment, as comfort, as exhortation. And I will just say that, as a friend of mine said, poetry affects people then. And as a friend of mine said about one of my poems, it's not the kindness that causes the hurricanes, it's the energy in the reciting of it. The energy and the emotion. And I think that's the beautiful thing about spoken word, because if you put your energy and emotion into your work, it comes across, and it becomes part of what I've also read about. Is it's a democratic movement, really. This big movement of spoken word in this country, in the U.S., across Europe, and perhaps in other places too. I have mostly researched. Well, no, the German speakers are doing it. I'm sure the Italians are doing it because I've seen things from there, and it's really wonderful because it is a democratic movement. Everyone can get their voice heard. And in this time of nationalistic politics and people putting up borders, that is just really beautiful, that we can go out in public. And I know the public has changed to Zoom, but still we can go out in public, we can talk about whatever is in our hearts. We can talk about anti-racism, we can talk about other things, anti-fascism, even though the governments are headed in that direction. And this allows people to have a voice, all sorts of people. It empowers the voice through verse, and I've read that it helps people develop their voice, even just by doing that in public. And this, you can touch all sorts of people and connect at this emotional level, and develop community even across borders now, as we are doing. And that is one of the beautiful things, whether it's, we're talking about loss, beauty, grief, love, racism or anti-racism, fascism or anti-fascism, we are connecting with people and we are comforted ourselves and we comfort others, because we talk from great distances now, and the pandemic has actually allowed that, or not allowed that, but encouraged us, because we've gone on Zoom, and so many people too in pandemic have had to just stop and think, what am I going to do with myself? So we actually have more, I think, more listeners than we might have had before, although I think the fascistic movement in the world is also encouraging people to talk. So I think, yes, poetry and performance poetry soothes people in the pandemic, gives them company, and makes them feel less alone. And Amanda Gorman performing at the inauguration of President Joe Biden, for me, was a beautiful example of that. You watched this, and Joe Biden, I did not vote for Trump. Okay, let's just get that straight. Never. And neither did my immediate family, the people I have the most responsibility for. So Amanda comes on after we've had Joe, who is getting older and obviously getting weaker. And if I had to watch all the things that had just happened to the United States Capitol, et cetera, I would have been very weak at my age. And I'm not the youngest, but it was really, you just want to drop over and be exhausted and weep and think this is just not going to work. But then here comes Amanda after Joe and other people have done their stuff. And Amanda, the poet, stands up there, and she is like a beacon of light. And, whether, I know there were a few people who didn't like the way she moved her hands or something. And I just thought, okay, these people are grumpy Grinches or whatever the word is. Because this woman was so beautiful in all ways. It just like shone out of her soul and her words and her dance, because she's a dancer too. It was just a godsend to the US and the world. And so anyway, you can see I'm an Amanda fan. So we will now go on to how I keep new ideas. And how are we doing on time? I'll just check that, because 6:55. Okay. How I keep new ideas coming. So I get prompts from poetry workshops, and I go to several regularly. I think if it's good to go to new ones too at times. It's also good if you find a group or two groups that you're comfortable with, because that gives you confidence. And when people say, let's all read everything out, you don't always say, oh, no, I'm not doing mine. But, it really is a beautiful thing, and everyone encourages everyone. So I find that very good. And if nothing else, it's sort of like an exercise. It doesn't mean every single thing you write at that will turn into the miracle you love, but it's an exercise, and it keeps you from getting rusty. Then I read poetry, I read fiction, I read nonfiction, and I do get ideas from that, whether it's politics. Girl Walking Across Europe was inspired by a poet in New York City who wrote about racism, and it was about a little boy with a dinosaur, and then it had the metaphor, and it kept going back and forth. And I decided, when I wrote mine, I wrote it, and then I started trying to put more negative things in, and I just couldn't. Anyway, so that piece developed. I wanted it to be a very hopeful sounding piece, so I put some things in, but otherwise I wanted people to sort of see, okay, how we could treat someone who shows up, right? And how different it is, how the reception, how different that is. So I also, and I urge all of you to do this, is to jot down lines when they come to you. Because, and if you have time, keep going with it a little bit. If not, go back to it later. But even in the middle of the night, I get up, I have the conversation with myself. Okay, you're going to have to turn on the light or leave quietly and not fall over and wake your husband up. But I try to write these things down, and sometimes I write whole stories or whole blogs in the middle of the night. And yes, it's really a burden to be a writer, but that's the way it is. So yes, jotting down lines is very good, very good. And it can be something that amuses you. It can be intriguing, whatever it is. Because those often are things you're very passionate about, or they can be just amusing things. And we certainly all need humor, which, as I was reading today, makes you stop and disarms you and allows you to reflect on things in a different way, perhaps. So humor is very important. The next thing is, well, how I start and develop pieces into performance. The piece you heard set in Mexico, I read a blog, and I was following a blog by a man who lives in Mexico, and he talked about these grandmothers being trained to install solar power, and I was just fascinated. And there really is a barefoot university. I think it's called the Barefoot College instead. But from that, with my fiction background and my fantasy, I decided to write a piece from the perspective of this woman. And so that's one of the ways I do things. Sometimes I think about things. Sometimes I just take ideas immediately and write them down. But I do like to do pieces, and really in both these pieces, not all of mine are like this, but I am a character. I am that person, and it actually helps me in a performance be less nervous if I'm not me. So otherwise I have to sort of distance myself from me, even if I'm being sort of me. But that sounds very strange, but I like, I really feel sort of I put myself in that place, just like when you're writing fiction, you put yourself in the place of that character, and you have to sort of think the way they're thinking. And for me, so I guess I love magical realism. I love Latin American literature and literature, Russian literature from different places. So I like fantasy and some surrealism in my pieces. How do I develop actually performing? Well, I stand in the kitchen and I start to say the lines. And yes, I hold the piece of paper at first, and then I put it down. And the more I say them, things happen. And it doesn't all happen the first day or the first week. Sometimes things come months afterwards where I think, oh, I'm supposed to sing that line. I didn't know that. Now, don't ask me, because I'm not really a singer, why this would come to me. But it did. So, for instance, one on a birthday, I was sitting there it was November, and I have a birthday in November when it gets dark and cold. And so I was depressed. I think it was, it was one of those things I thought nobody's going to say anything. And I started this piece, When the Day is Dark, When the Day is Dark. And it turned out to be a sort of a rock and roll piece, which is, it's funny because out of desperation and depression, I wrote that, but it actually has a sort of sardonic tone, and people sort of clap and really get excited when I do it. So, you never know what is going to come out of things. And I ask advice from my family. I'm fortunate to have a son who wants to study drama and does plays. And I ask my husband, I ask other friends as I perform it, in public at events. So I just, and I practice even while I take walks. Now we can blame Darren Carey for that, because he said, he's got a booming voice. He walks his dog and he just shouts the words. And the thing is, sometimes I try to be quiet when they come up, or people look at me, was that woman talking? I don't care anymore. I had to film my feet walking down a road the other day, and here came this nice woman who's always smiled, and she just smiled sweetly. And I had to keep filming my feet because we're doing this for this video project, and not speak to her about why on earth I would walk along with my camera filming my feet, And I thought, it's all right. Anyway, so that, let's see. Yes, performing, Zoom is a little different, although sometimes we unmute, but performing in public and the instant feedback is also very beautiful. Because if you just write fiction in a dark corner, which is what I did and wanted to do for a number of years, it's very, very lonely. And people are, Nottingham and generally most places I have performed, people have been so beautiful and gentle. And, every place says you're not supposed to be mean to people. You're not supposed to yell at them because they said this or they thought that, no isms. And it's very helpful to do it in person. I will just say some writers are very shy at first, but I have seen people, even people I know who weren't as shy, come around within a year or so. It's amazing, the change in them. So why don't we ask a few questions now before I go on, and then then I can continue if anybody has a question about what I've already talked about. Oh, Anne. Maybe Anne should unmute herself.
There. Thanks. I loved your performances, and the second one, the Spanish one, I've seen you do it before, just over a year ago, and it was lovely to hear it again. And I've got too many questions really, but
they're recording it. That's good.
I'll just say you talked about. These were kind of quite political pieces that I imagine. Well, I don't want to sort of make too many assumptions, but I imagine most people here would agree with those politics. But you're talking about sort of like the range of voices. So I'm wondering, do fascists come to these things, and what happens then?
Well, that's a good question. In Nottingham, they don't seem to come. So we're really lucky, and I haven't seen them come in Derby if I've been there, or in Leicester if I've been there performing, or in Loughborough. And in fact, in Loughborough, I once performed at a pub, and everyone downstairs, because those two pieces were very loud, stopped talking and listened. And none of them ran up the stairs and started to get mean, although they were very surreal pieces. So maybe they were just thrown off guard, but I don't think it was a mean crowd down there at the Pen and Needle. But I do have a piece that is anti-gun, and it's a fantasy, really surreal, and it's a fairly long piece. I have put that on video and will eventually put it on my YouTube, but I would be afraid to do that in the US, even though, it starts, I'm from a country that died. And that is a reiteration. And then it goes into a fantasy about what if this is what gun people did. And it's all about them, you know, cooking something and then inviting over their third grade teacher. And there's a certain suspense, like, is something bad going to happen, which it doesn't. But I would not want to do that in the US. And to be honest, I'm sure there are lots of, you know, I've connected now with these Zooms that are more international, and there are poets who come from the US, and I would have to ask them, you know, what the situation is now. In the 90s, it was fine, but the 80s and the 90s are not what's there now. So I really, yeah, there are pieces I would not do in the US in public. And part of that is not just the fascists, it's the guns. And, you know, that everyone, I don't want to be at places. When I was in the US and I was younger, people were not allowed to take a gun everywhere. Yes. So I think we're lucky in this country that at least, you know, the weapon thing is just not the same. Any other questions? Okay.
I'll only ask this one as well, but I really like, and I think I might have said this to you before, I like how you use other languages, and I mean I like the Spanish one, but I could understand that, and then I'm thinking that not everybody would, and you don't translate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering about what reactions you've had about that, if that's been a problem for people, or people particularly like it because it's bringing in this kind of question of, well, what might that mean, etc.
Yeah, I do use language in various pieces, and I've got German and another one that was set at a Tupperware party in Austria on a farm. And the German there is actually, it's not German, it's a dialect, although I use some German words, but even some standard German speakers wouldn't understand that dialect. So I really sort of repeat the dialect in a sort of funny way that it's just made up, you know. But generally, people have been very friendly about whether I use some Spanish, or sometimes I have one piece where I use 3 or 4 different words from different languages. And I use them, you know, generally I think people can still follow the story. And if I have actions, they see that. I've had good reactions here, and I've, like, the Abuela Solar is on a podcast here in this country out of a group here. And in Texas and the US, a lot of the US, but in Texas, certainly Spanish would be just fine in public, and people would really mostly understand, I think, at this point, because already when I was there, you know, there are words that people just use that are Spanish, and they pronounce them, you know, close to the Spanish way, even if they're speaking English. So yes, no, I've you know, just like when I performed one in Germany, I tried to put more German words in. Because I had a very educated group and I knew they spoke a lot of English. So I just did that, and they did get it. They laughed. It was a funny piece. So, you know, it wasn't about some serious issue. It was the Tupperware piece is what I wrote for that, but it was turning 40 at a Tupperware party. So yeah, it's you know, if you want to throw in words. Oh, I just had a friend the other day who wrote a piece, and then he used just a little bit of the Gaelic in it. Was that it, Alexandra Gaelic? And I have to say, I didn't understand those few words he used, but it was about nature and things like that. And when he said those words, it was like I could see rocks and ocean splashing. I mean, it was like, for me, I really loved that. And the sound of it, I think, and he was writing, I think, about a place in Scotland, but it was so lovely. I think it can really add to things. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Annie.
So I was just wondering, when you're writing, do you write with a particular audience in mind, or do you think about the audience that you might be performing it to, and does that affect what you write and how you write it?
Sometimes I do for a certain audience. If people say we want to do this or we want to do that, would people write poems on that topic? I'm a person who feels less competent doing that. So I sort of have scattershot approach where I write about all sorts of things. But I have written some pieces that I ended up thinking were, you know, pretty okay, that were supposed to be on a certain topic. I'm just thinking about some. It's some people are very good at that, and of course people are commissioned to do certain things. I was lucky, like the Tupperware party, these people were turning 40, and I was turning 40, so turning 40 at a Tupperware party just, you know, worked out really well. And I mean, of course, I guess, you know, you didn't have to think I'm at the Tupperware party. That's not really the, you know, but it just, I thought, oh, I'll just write about that. It wasn't exactly that day, but, you know, it worked. So I'm trying to think if we do have, well, we had a quarterly event for the DIY poets of Nottingham, and they asked me after I'd been a member a while, you know, would you like to do this and be the featured person? And I thought, oh my goodness. And so really for that I'm working on this show where I write about being an immigrant and the different places I've lived. And I had a few pieces, but I thought, oh my gosh, I don't have one for this country. I don't have one for that country. And I'm afraid that was one of those times where late at night, your mind, you know, you're lying there and like 11 o'clock or something, you think, I'm going to have to go write this down. You know, at least it wasn't that late. But then I would go and I did write some work that I'm very proud of. That was because Frank said, Laura, do you want to do this? And then I did write these things, and it came together in a really great way. And people were like, wow, you know, this is like some of your best work yet. So I think people can definitely, it can spur you, yes, and it is good. You still can write beautiful work other times, but with a certain assignment, I think it makes your brain start to think, okay, well, what can I do? And yes, I hope I answered that. Another question? I can, Annie, do you have another one? Okay. I was going to talk briefly about how to continue working during the pandemic, or what I did. So I had a few rough videos of my work, but suddenly, although poets really jumped into the fray and immediately started continuing workshops, having events, planning little festivals online, which was absolutely incredible, mostly completely unpaid. I was continuing that, but I thought, well, how can I get some of my work out? Because it's obviously just different to do it on Zoom. So I decided that I would try to film a bunch more of my pieces and then put them on my YouTube, which I'm actually needing to put more on. I have put some more together. So that's what I've done. My husband has helped me, and we're getting better at the tech stuff. And I sometimes have had a tech guy. I've paid him something to do stuff, and then my husband is doing some now. And oh, and one other thing, I decided, because the pandemic is bringing people down, that I would try especially to think, or definitely to do pieces that were cheerful, or that somehow were uplifting or intriguing, and have beautiful backgrounds if I could find them, or interesting backgrounds. So for instance, the Abuela Solar piece is got this big rock and greenery around it. And I did a piece called Google Hoop Lost, Anne. Google Hoop Lost has the word Google Hoop in it a lot, and it just becomes more than what the word really means, which is just a bundt cake. It becomes a celebration and a journey of life. And it's a rather short piece, but I went out into this dandelion field, and there's forest behind, and I do the piece. So, you know, I think that is good. You know, it makes people feel happy, or even if they just look at the piece and they don't listen to me, they seem to be happy. So anyway, so I think, you know, you could do anything. You could stand in front of a red brick building and it could have meaning. And people do that. I mean, you see pieces out of London, and we all have red brick buildings and other brick buildings anyway, but you can find an interesting background and do a video. And I think, you know, people are doing that and being very creative. So that is what I did. And again, I want to compliment the local, national, and international poetry communities that have jumped in to keeping things going online, with meetings, events, charitable drives, and slams. If you haven't read for the local Punk for the Homeless, you may want to volunteer, and you can read, you know, whatever you want to read, I'm sure. And they're trying to raise money for homeless children. I've done that a few times. You can just look on Facebook, Punk for the number for the homeless, if you want to do something for them. I know right now they're even looking for people for the March 6th reading. So what I hope is, you know, I hope the pandemic ends eventually, but I hope that with all this Zoom that we have learned and online events, that we keep going, because I have met, you know, you go to these events and you meet poets from the US, there's someone from Russia, there's someone who lives in Spain, Nova Scotia, Canada, Italy, France. It's just really beautiful. And all these people come together with a shared passion for the word, for words. And that has been encouraging to all of us and to anyone who goes to listen. You know, and there are groups I know, like the Gloucestershire group, and others, Beehive, have said they will continue after the pandemic because they have people from all over, and it's just so wonderful for that to have that sharing. And we can also think of the idea that, you know, if some events happen like that, instead of all of us driving somewhere or flying somewhere, then we're helping the world be more sustainable and less climate change to happen. So that's pretty much it on the poetry front. Any other questions on that? I can say one thing or two about blogging if you want to hear it. Okay. I started my blog, which is called Tellin Stories, Grevel Blogs on Life and Writing. And a critique group I was in, a friend wanted to start one to help promote his own writing and to write book reviews. And he learned that it was good, if you want to do a blog, to have another friend or two or three that you can do blogs and refer to each other's blogs to increase the traffic. So that's a good idea if you ever want to do a blog. How do you find topics to blog about? It's good to really think what your purpose is. Now, I know Anne has a good blog, I believe, and I've read it. And so some people write book reviews, or some people write about their writing and ideas for writing. They give tips. They talk about how to get published. There's all sorts of things you can inform people about in the writing world, or on some other topic if you want to. and for me, I just decided that I would be happy to write something that I liked and that other people were entertained by or really enjoyed reading, and that way I would get some of my stories out without having to worry about marketing, and that people would read them. And I did get a little following, and people read them and were happy and gave me really wonderful feedback, and that made me feel less lonely too as a writer. And that's another good way to connect with people, which I realized that a lot of my writing over the years and my performing has been about connecting people in different places, people with nature in different places, and the humanity of the brotherhood of man. Yes, I'm one of those people. I was a little younger than the hippies, but I believe in that. So anyway, I have a series that's about being on a small horse-powered farm. My husband lived on, and I lived on in Texas. And that was actually that series requested by 2 mathematicians from the University of Loughborough, young men who were, interested in the adventure of that life. And it was an adventure. And then I have other memories that are written as essays and current events and fiction stories. So that's really pretty much everything I do. I have not put a lot of my poetry on my blog, but I certainly could start doing that. So we're almost out of time. Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, that brings up the question of, publishing poetry. Does it make sense to publish versus, having things online, or does having something online, create these problems that you always see when if you ever think of submitting something, it seems like you're not supposed to submit it anywhere else and shouldn't be published. And some of them don't. It almost seems like they purposely don't mention online, venues, but I sort of think, well, maybe it is a publication. But then, if the world is going online, then is it even important to be in print anymore? Maybe it's better to have videos out or just be reading more. I don't know. Just wondering what your experience is with all of that.
Well, yes, I don't know. Things are changing, that's for sure. The print media can be very conservative, of course, about that sort of thing. And if you put your poetry on or your stories, then there are places that will not take them they'll consider them published. Now, then I wonder, if you perform your piece, that's like you went and had a play performed, that's what it is. That is sort of like having it published too, even if it wasn't for everyone. But yeah, that's a sticky area, and some Facebook pages or sites are private. So if you put your poetry on that, you can still submit it other places and it doesn't count. And some places will say sometimes it's online flash fiction and other fiction and poetry will say it's okay if you've put it on your own Facebook or something like that. They will still accept it. More conservative literary journals, university journals, especially in the US, I don't think they would take it. So it just, it's just something you have to think about. I mean, if you get, at my age, I start to think, let's just let people read it. And sometimes I still worry a little bit, but it's so hard to really get out there, and get the right place for a print publisher. You can send your things and it doesn't quite get in. And then occasionally it does. It's hard to know. I've had like the podcast, and I'd like to do more podcasts. I think that's a very good way. If you also like to use your voice a lot with your performance, I'd like to do more of that. And then there's also the online, say like the COVID poetry series. There's been perhaps a number of those, and I had some of those put on. But yes, no, it's you just have to keep Leanne Moden, who has published far and wide, always says, you know, you just have to keep going because she gets a lot of rejections too. So if you really want to do that, you just need to keep trying, is basically what it is.
Right. Yeah, because I think also I was reading some of them, some places want you to have a cover letter in which you state you're following. Well, that would actually presume that you're doing a lot online, because that's what would build your following. So I guess you just have to be very prolific and write all the stuff that you have online, and then write other stuff that you're not putting online, but just only using for submissions to these conservative places. And then somehow, you know, use your online activity as your way of showing that you have some kind of following. I guess it's because they want a guarantee that they're going to sell, I suppose. So you're supposed to do your own marketing, and all they do is print it, and then they send it out to the following that you've already basically had to generate yourself. Sounds like.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I think just perseverance, and if you want your work to get out there, then you just take opportunities that come, you know, or if there's a festival coming up, submit something. If you're part of a group, then, you know, encourage the group to submit things, like the Nottingham Poetry Festival and other festivals in Nottingham are very good. And yes, and, you know, you just have to try things too, you know, that to see if they work for you.
Yeah. And Goodwin's question about the foreign language, I was reading a novel that was being written by a friend of mine, you know, chapter by chapter, and I really, really enjoyed each chapter that came my way. But what was challenging about this book was that it was written in English, but it had a lot of Finnish in it. And in the end, she never got it published, and she never really considered self-publishing, which is a shame. But I sort of think that part of the problem was this, you know, the fact that there was so much Finnish in the dialogue, especially in the dialogue, because then, you know, your typical American publisher might just sort of say, well, you know, what do I do with this? But as a reader, I don't even know Finnish. And for me, it was still fine, because from the context, I could tell what they were saying, and it did add a lot of sort of more of a texture to it, even though it wasn't, you know, it wasn't poetry. I think with poetry, there would be much more of that, obviously, than in a novel. But even in a novel, it was interesting.
Yeah. Well, and just quickly to say, in Texas, even way back before I left, and I have subscribed to some things more recently, they will put Spanish in. They'll put a paragraph in, they'll put a sentence. I mean, there's, what is it? All the Pretty Horses, the author of that, who's very famous, has 3 novels, and one of them starts in Spanish, basically, and it's a dialogue, you know, and it's not a complicated dialogue if you know some Spanish, but he just did that. And of course, I don't remember if it was the first one of the series or not, but they do put it in, and I've seen other languages, you know, Polish or Russian, and I don't know. I think it can add a lot. And I mean, when I was young, I occasionally would read things, you know, that had more French in them, and at the time I didn't know any French, and it always irritated me that they didn't just put some footnotes in or something, you know, instead of assuming everyone spoke French. So you can always, and I often do put, you know, if it's written, I put a footnote in. Yes.